Dr. Cox, floor is yours.
I call this meeting of the Animal Advisory Board to order. At this time, we'll begin with item number 2, public comment. No takers.
There's no one signed up for public comments, Dr. Cox.
Excuse me?
There's no one signed up for public comments today.
Were there any written comments submitted?
No, sir.
Okay. Then we will move on to number 3, workshops. Okay.
All right, Stacy, you want me to jump in here on the COVID-19 update?
Yes, please.
All right, good afternoon, board members. I'm going to fill in. We've had the unfortunate loss of one of our assistant fire chief, his spouse. So there's a funeral service going on. So I'm going to take on for Doug Brinkley, ACM, who's been kind of leading our efforts on the COVID side, and just give the board a little bit of a background, be able to answer any questions. As you all know and are all in the middle of experiencing, I heard some of the conversation earlier, just the strain and the stress and stuff of these times. We as a city have been monitoring, started kind of monitoring the kind of national and international landscape in February. Was standing up kind of a high-level EOC, our Emergency Operations Center, really just trying to get a better grip of what we were seeing, when the first cases first were identified in the United States. And from there, we ramped up our EOC operations as of late February, early March. So for the months of March, April, May, and into early June, we were running at a full-scale emergency operation, really focused on something that, although we've been very practiced and trained in emergency operations, it's been much more related to hurricanes, weather events, and other forms of man-made catastrophes, should it be a major accident or a rail line issue or something like that. But so this has been a new test, of course, for city staff across the board, and for really everybody who's involved and impacted everybody in the U.S. and the world, really. I just want to hit on some of the highlights for the board and then open it up for Q&A. But at first, our focus was on safety, not only of our residents, but of staff and the work and functioning of our work. We initiated several things that we've talked about and thought about, but as a city government, you never really consider a kind of a telework policy and everything else. We initiated that. We sent home as many people as we could in the first initial month or so to work remotely, just to limit their risk and exposure and stuff. Of course, unfortunately, we can't do that with everybody, as our first responders, our public works field staff, environmental neighborhood services field staff, our permit department downstairs, treasury. We have a large number of our employees that don't have that luxury. So we looked at their safety as well. So we initiated some, as y'all are aware, adoption, kept adoptions going, but did it by outside, setting up appointments only. It worked very well. I know we were able to keep the momentum, but also take advantage of more people being at home, realizing that, hey, they might be able to come adopt an animal and stuff. So Catherine and her group did a great job managing that. We did the same downstairs here at City Hall with our permits and treasury side, payments by appointment only or permits by appointment only, pushing our online platforms much more. It has gained traction. It has been a positive learning curve and stuff for us there. But as with everybody, you're dealing with that constant what if scenario. We continue to look and continue to still make changes. We're doing health screening when people walk in, just as you see it at most other government type facilities or major businesses where they're doing temperature screening and everything else. We are tracking a dashboard of impacted city staff, so we can let everybody kind of know the locations of where they are at. We have certain rules and HIPAA guidelines and everything else we have to follow that we can't divulge too much information, but we had heard that request from the staff that people were just interested. So we started targeting just, hey, these are the general locations where we are seeing certain impacts. We had a big concern at the start that, oh my gosh, what if this goes rampant across city staff? How do we provide services to our residents and the community? So we ran through a series of exercises, all of our directors, and really identifying at what level should we start to lose staff. Do we start to pull back services and reduce services? We fortunately never got to that point where we had a just, 30, 40% of a particular workforce out, which is really good, and we're considering ourselves successful there. But we did experience in certain divisions across the city where you'd have 2 or 3 or 4 in a certain area. And to be honest, everybody just kind of went with the flow. We had people step up and pick up in certain areas. Other areas we had to delay certain services where we did, but we communicated that out to the organization and to the residents and any of our clientele that would be doing business there. We ran through that issue, with permits and some other stuff where we had to kind of do some modified deliverables. But as you look through these events, you're always like, okay, there's an end in sight. Well, there was no end in sight. And then we started getting the governor's orders as far as we're going to reopen Texas. So that came another curveball. How do you start to accommodate the governor's orders in reopening restaurants and reopening retail businesses, which for us was very important. And we typically focus after any natural disaster. There's always a team working on how do we reopen the city? How do we get people back to normal? Because that kind of gets a comfort and a state of mind and everything else, whether it be a hurricane or a flood or anything, is if you can get a majority of the people back to their normal business, it tends to help kind of just the mental side of what we're all dealing with. Well, as y'all all know, in this case, we're still dealing with it. And there's really no known into it at this point in time with the dilemma of schools and what's up in the air there. But in the meantime, we've been opening up certain businesses. So the key thing for us there was what was going to be the impact to the city's revenue streams. Sales tax is a large part of what we rely on for funding the general fund side. So we started off running various budget scenarios, trying to figure out what that impact to sales tax was going to be. We saw a decrease in some of our fines and forfeitures and stuff on the, basically we weren't enforcing, there wasn't as much traffic, so we weren't doing as much ticket writing, and permit activity stayed pretty level. Sales tax was our biggest area of exposure and risk because we don't control it. It is all market driven. So we started running some scenarios just to understand what that looks like and pulling back on services that we could cut back on, a lot of our rehabilitation across the city. So we took those measures to make sure that we could finish fiscal year 20 in a good note, not put the city in a bind, but also prepare for fiscal year 21 being a slower year, but really focusing on a better outcome after 21. So we're already thinking 18 plus months ahead of what does FY22 start to look like, and how do we make FY21 kind of a balanced approach to really not cut everything out, but keep the basic services and what we need to out there. But we will be pulling back on rehab is our biggest part. We'll be cutting, we've trimmed back travel and training. We've trimmed back some other things throughout the budget, fuel expenses and other costs, because we've seen them go down. So we've been working for the past 2 months trying to come up with what's a budget that can be recommended to City Council and an adoption side. So that work's been going on. All the meanwhile, you're trying to predict what are people's trends going to be like from a standpoint of spending dollars and everything else. So we've seen sales tax come in better than we anticipated, which is good. But trying to predict sales tax, I've learned, is something you don't want to get caught up in. That's not a game. It can be a game changer real quick, especially when your general fund side is 39% of our general fund budget is generated from sales tax. We allocate about $39 million a year to the general fund budget from sales tax. So it's a substantial amount. The city years ago adopted the sales tax for property tax reduction clause. So we put as much of that into some of these programs that we can in order to keep our property taxes where they are at 33 cents. So all that was a balance. Nicole and her group and Stacy and that team have done a great job as far as the reopening. Nicole's been kind of tasked with the regulatory side, which if anybody's ever played as a kid with your magic 8-ball, that's pretty much what it's like. You're trying to interpret a governor's orders. You're trying to go talk to retailers, restaurateurs, general public that, everybody doesn't just voice a concern or complaint with the restaurant. They voice it to the city and want the city to go voice it with the restaurant. So there's been a large task and a large team. She's worked closely. Our economic development group started way back when of putting together incentive programs. So we have our Sweet Cash program where you can go buy gift cards and then go utilize and expend. And it kind of puts more emphasis out into the public to go spend locally and stuff. So we're trying to incentivize as much of that as we can. But this has definitely been a task that I think as we look back now, we were definitely up to, but the future right now is still a little on the shaky side. We don't know exactly what the future is going to hold. But hopefully with hospitalizations plateauing and things starting to trend in the right direction, if people will just abide by some of the recommendations and CDC guidelines and stuff, we'll get through this. The governor kept producing orders. So you've seen the Skeeters start up their 4-team kind of deal with strict social distancing guidelines. You've all heard, if you watch Major League Baseball, they started up, and now the Florida Marlins have 15 different players. Half of their active roster is impacted and tested positive for COVID-19. So you've got NBA players that are not wanting to participate. You've got, any of y'all with college age or high school age kids or anything else. We don't know what the fall semesters look like or sports situations are going to look like. So it's been a real mess as far as life in general. But when dealt with lemons, you got to make lemonade. So we have been going to work figuring out those next steps for us as a city. We did make a recommendation to council on the budget. The biggest impact that will impact not only this group from the shelter perspective, but a lot of our general obligation bond program projects was we didn't think recommending a 3-cent tax increase for FY21 was going to be well received across the community. We have made a recommendation of starting out with a 0.5 cent increase for 21 and really focusing on 2 major drainage projects and a few smaller ones where we had structural flooding from Harvey and the May 19 rain event. So that process and program has been developed. The engineering department's worked hard to kind of make that recommendation and move it forward. We were just starting our budget workshops with city council. So the capital improvement program and the general fund side has been totally tossed up in the air. It's like a salad bowl right now. And we're going to keep mixing it every year. We've seen things push back, EOC, Public Safety Training Facility, animal shelter have slid back design wise. I think they're slated in 23, and Stacey, I think we'll hit on some of this later, but it's impacted all kind of projects, not just this one. So anything that was in that 3-year time frame essentially got stretched to about a 5-year window. That's not a done deal. As y'all know, we've been back and forth with just funding options and the non-GO and then doing GO and getting it approved. We will be revisiting this every 6 months or so with City Council. We'll revisit it again next budget year. And if for some reason we look at a different increase in taxes next year, then that could again shuffle the deck as far as the timing of those projects. It has been a challenge on the budgetary side. We ran 3 different scenarios. We ran all the expert economists put together what's called a V, which is if you track your projections and your growth, and then you hit a dip, slight recession, setback, and then you rebound pretty quickly and you keep on going. So you lose a few months of growth, but your trajectory stays pretty much the same. We ran a U scenario, which is a prolonged kind of decrease and a slower climb back to normalcy. And then we ran the L scenario, which is really you lose that momentum and your return to your projected growth is much, much longer and exaggerated. And you're staring at a lot larger loss in revenue. So Each of those scenarios had roughly a percentage kind of impact. I believe the B scenario was about a 7 to 8% initial impact, but then you rebound pretty quick. So you have about a 6 or 8 month, maybe a year max impact, and then you're back to normal. The U scenario, which is what we've recommended to council, is about a 11% decrease to our general fund budget, which is a hit, and that hits both our debt side as well as our O&M side. And then we look at a return to normal throughout the course of FY21, and we've targeted 6 months into FY21 to kind of revisit where are we at and how are we projecting forward. And then from there, we'll initiate our rehab programs and some other stuff, and we'll be able to reevaluate, has sales tax rebounded? Really, how are our residents and our businesses doing from a standpoint of job loss or business closures or impacts there, because that impacts not only us from the sales tax side, it impacts our community as a whole, because people without jobs, people losing jobs is not what anybody wants to see anybody go through. So our goal is to reevaluate that in March of 21. The L scenario was much more doom and gloom. It was about a 15% reduction in total revenue, if I remember correctly, but for about a 2+ year period. So it was taking us 2+ years to recover to get back to where we were pre-COVID. That was the CIP in that form took on about a 9-year deliverable for the GO bond program. So you take a 3-year program and now we turn it into a 9-year program. Fortunately, we have seen the sales tax rebound. That a U presentation and recommendation to council was acceptable, and we feel comfortable and confident that that is kind of the direction it's going to go. The V was just not likely. You heard the concerns of the second wave. Everybody's seen, I think every time you turn on the news, you see the hot box, the red states, what everybody, the CDC and what the federal government and all the news reports are talking about, the second wave. You're hearing it now overseas and in parts of China. You're seeing what happened in Russia and South America and Brazil. So nobody knows, essentially. We have been pushing a lot of social media on just people complying, wearing masks, social distancing, reducing your gatherings. And we know it's hard, but it seems that there is some positiveness coming out of that by what we're seeing results-wise. We track what the hospitals are looking like. We track what their hospitalization rates are, how many beds available and everything else, not only in Sugar Land, but with our medical advisor, we're getting a kind of a dose regionally of what that's looking like. So it's been a challenge to say the least, but everybody, I cannot say enough about our staff. I cannot say enough about, our leadership with council and with, our city manager started new in January, and 1 month into the job, he's dealt a pandemic. So who would have thought it? But we continue to work, and from my standpoint, I continue to scavenge and scrape and claw together whatever we can from a funding standpoint to move certain initiatives forward. And we won't stop. We're going to continue to do that as we go through this next year and evaluate this. We still have our budget workshops to go in August with City Council, and are looking forward to having that conversation with them. Not only to hear their interests or concerns, but also share with them, services that we know are going to be impacted. When you don't perform any regular routine rehab for 6 months, just to trying to evaluate how we are progressing from the financial perspective. The phone doesn't stop ringing. People don't stop calling in concerns or complaints or issues where there's a sidewalk, a curb, or piece of pavement stuff that's messed up. So we'll continue to capture that, respond to emergencies only, but it is not the way Sugar Land is used to doing business. We are still keeping our customer service and orientation in there, but it's just we're asking people to be patient, because we're taking a necessary pause to make sure from a financial perspective we're on the right trajectory before we pull the trigger and start getting back into the mix. But there will still be some activity. I think Stacy's going to talk to you a little bit just of some legacy work and everything else upcoming. But I just wanted to provide that kind of general update. And I could talk about this for hours, I think, and I don't want to bore you all with everything, but are there any questions from the board specifically related to the COVID-19 and just what the city has been dealing with? Wow, y'all are easy. Great. Well, I think with that, if y'all have any other questions at any point in time, don't hesitate to reach out to Catherine, Nicole, or Stacy, or me. You know, we want to be an open book, of course, and appreciate what this board's done, and the work we still have to do moving forward. So it's as much as it's crazy times, it's exciting times, because this is when you get to reinvent yourself and you get to really look at change and what change makes sense. How do you become more efficient? How do you do things, you know, on more of a shoestring budget here or there? But I know we're up for the challenge, and y'all are in definitely good hands and stuff with Stacy and Nicole and Catherine. And I know the dogs and cats are still there, and you know, and we'll keep working at it. But the future, I think, is still bright, even though we got to take this little pause and this little dip. But with that, I'll turn it back over to Stacy.
Thank you, Chris. If there are no questions, we're going to go on to item B, the review and discussion of the 2019 general obligation bond. And I'm going to turn it over to Stacy.
Good afternoon, everyone. So at this time, I wanted to provide an update on the status of our 2019 general obligation bond propositions, capital campaign planning process, and future work with the Legacy Foundation. As you may recall, the animal shelter expansion project scope was broken down into two areas, which included the $6.6 million in funding by the city, and then the $2.4 million to be funded through a capital campaign and fundraising process. So the city portion of the project was included within the 2019 general obligation bond election as its own proposition, and it was approved by the voters at the $6.6 million. And so, as Chris had mentioned, with the 2019 GO bond election, it was anticipated that the bond funds would be available in fiscal year 2021, and that all projects would be under construction within 3 years. Next slide, please. But as Chris also mentioned, the COVID-19 pandemic has financially impacted the city and our residents. So on July 21st, the city's proposed fiscal year 21 budget and 5-year capital improvement program was filed. And just as a reminder, the first year in our capital improvement program, or CIP, is budgeted, but the remaining 4 years are used as for planning purposes. So the budget and CIP included a revised implementation plan for the GO bonds. It includes a phased project implementation that focuses first on projects to address structural flooding, and anticipates that half-cent increase in fiscal year 2021 rather than the 3 cent that was initially anticipated with the bond election last year. Next slide, please. So during the month of August, the City Council will take that opportunity to review and discuss the proposed budget in a series of workshops. And the adoption of the budget and tax rate are scheduled for September 15th. Next slide, please. So what does that really mean for the animal shelter expansion project? So as I mentioned, the GO bond projects are now being implemented through a phased approach. It focuses on the drainage projects in fiscal year 21, and it shifts the remainder of the GO bond projects. So at this time, you may recall we do have funds available to further work through schematic design, but the actual design process now is estimated at fiscal year 2023, with construction in fiscal year 2025. The project timing, as Chris mentioned, we will be continuing to look through, the budget process and throughout the year as we move forward to determine if projects can move forward any quicker than currently anticipated. And the ongoing economic recovery response is really going to help us determine the timing of the project moving forward. Next slide, please. So in addition to the city side of the project, we also wanted to provide an update on the capital campaign process. So as a reminder, the Sugarland Legacy Foundation will be the primary fundraising organization for the Animal Shelter Expansion Project. However, we do anticipate the Animal Advisory Board members assisting in this process. In early March, the Legacy Foundation conducted interviews of consultants who could assist with board development and capital campaign development. However, in April, the Legacy Foundation decided to postpone hiring a consultant until at least the fall of 2020. They really felt that in general, fundraising should be postponed for the time being due to the pandemic. And since that time, the Legacy Foundation has focused their efforts on what is called the Safe and Well Project to help businesses in the community open back up safely and really get back to their normal operations. And since beginning that project just a few months ago, the Legacy Foundation has actually raised approximately $30,000 in both monetary and supply donations. So they've been quite successful in this project. Next slide, please. We do anticipate some changes in membership on the Legacy Foundation Board of Directors, as some members are not seeking reappointment. However, we do anticipate that the new members will be appointed prior to their next board meeting, which would be in October. And at that meeting, the Legacy Foundation plans to revisit the consultant and capital campaign discussion to really determine how to move forward with that process. At this time, I would like to ask Susan if she has anything else she would like to add as a member of the Legacy Foundation. Susan?
Thanks, Stacy. You did a really good job of recapping what's going on with the Legacy Foundation. I'll just add that we did have a meeting a couple of weeks ago, and the mayor was in attendance, and there was quite a bit of really good discussion about the vision and continuing to kind of change what that board does to make it more of a fundraising board. And like Stacy said, we've got, I think probably we're going to be 4 or 5 new board members that we're going to be recruiting for. And the emphasis that we're going to really be looking for people that have a strong fundraising background so we can kind of bring that strength to the board. So that's definitely something that there's been a lot of discussion around, particularly, thinking about the challenge of fundraising for the shelter. We really want to kind of change the makeup of the board and have some people that have that expertise.
Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So that concludes, the items we had wanted to discuss really focused on, the GO bond propositions and the capital campaign process moving forward. So at this time, if you have any questions, myself and Chris, and then also members of the engineering department are also on the call. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, so no questions? All right. We've gone through.
Dr. Cox, just one quick thing, if you don't mind, before we close the meeting. I just wanted to touch base to let you know kind of the schedule for our upcoming meetings. At this point, we would anticipate our next board meeting to be scheduled for kind of the October-November timeframe. Once the fiscal year 21 budget is approved and the Legacy Foundation has had an opportunity to meet again. So it would probably be in that October-November timeframe, but it would be scheduled for our normal meeting time and date, which is the second Wednesday of the month at noon. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Somebody.
A motion that we adjourn.
You have a second?
Second.
Okay, we're adjourned. Thank y'all.
Thank y'all very much.
Be safe.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Catherine.
Bye-bye.